The dusty stranger collapsed against the hitching post outside the general store in Snowflake, Arizona territory, one hand clutching her swollen belly, and the other reaching desperately for the weathered wood to keep herself upright. It was late August of 1881, and the heat bore down mercilessly on the small Mormon settlement nestled in the White Mountains. Griffin Xavier had been loading supplies onto his wagon when he heard the soft thud of the woman's body meeting the boardwalk. He turned, his hand still gripping a sack of flour, and saw her crumpled there like a discarded puppet. Without thinking, he dropped the flour and rushed to her side. "Madam," he knelt beside her, his weathered hands hovering uncertainly over her shoulders. Up close, he could see the dust coating her dark hair, the cracked dryness of her lips, the way her eyelids fluttered but would not open. She was young, he realized, maybe 20 or so, and clearly with child. Her dress was torn in places, stained with travel and hardship. "Someone fetch Doc Morrison," Griffin called out, but the few townspeople on the street merely stopped and stared. He could see the calculation in their eyes, the judgment forming before they even knew her story. Snowflake was a tight-knit community, and strangers were not always welcomed with open arms, especially not unmarried pregnant women who appeared out of nowhere. Griffin scooped the woman into his arms, surprised at how light she was despite her condition. She should have been heavier, should have been healthy and glowing the way his own mother had been when she carried his younger siblings. Instead, she felt like a bird with hollow bones, fragile and fading. He carried her to his wagon and laid her gently in the bed, cushioning her head with his own bedroll. "I am getting you help," he murmured, though he did not know if she could hear him. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and he took that as a good sign. The ride to his small ranch on the outskirts of town took 20 minutes, and Griffin spent every second of it watching her over his shoulder, making sure she was still breathing. He lived alone on the property he had claimed 3 years ago, working hard to build something of his own after years of drifting from ranch to ranch. The house was modest, 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was clean and sturdy, and right now it was the safest place he could think of. Once home, he carried her inside and laid her on his own bed. He had never had a woman in his house before, let alone in his bed, and under different circumstances he might have felt awkward about it. But all he felt now was concern. He fetched water from the pump outside and brought it in with clean cloths, gently wiping the dust from her face and trying to get some moisture between her lips. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on him with confusion and fear. They were a striking shade of blue, like the sky right before twilight. "You are safe," Griffin said quickly, keeping his voice low and calm. "You fainted in town. I brought you here to recover." She tried to sit up, panic flashing across her face. "I need to keep moving. I cannot stay." "You are in no condition to go anywhere," Griffin said firmly but gently, placing a hand on her shoulder to ease her back down. "You need rest and food. When did you last eat?" The question seemed to catch her off guard, and tears suddenly filled her eyes. "I do not remember." 2 days ago, maybe 3. There was a farm where they let me work for a meal." Griffin felt anger rise in his chest, not at her, but at whatever circumstances had led her to this state. "Well, you are going to eat now, and drink, and rest. Everything else can wait." He went to the kitchen and put together what he could, heating up the leftover stew from the night before and cutting thick slices of bread. When he brought it back to her, she was sitting up, her hands protectively wrapped around her belly. She ate slowly at first, then faster, as if her body was remembering what it was like to be nourished. "I am Griffin," he said, sitting in the chair by the bed. "Griffin Xavier. This is my ranch about 3 miles outside Snowflake." She swallowed a mouthful of stew and looked at him with those remarkable eyes. "Bethany, Bethany Henderson. I am grateful for your kindness, Mr. Xavier. Most people would not have helped. Most people should be ashamed of themselves then, Griffin said. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. You do not have to tell me anything you do not want to, but you are welcome to stay here until you are strong enough to decide what you want to do next. Bethany looked down at her bowl, her dark hair falling forward to hide her face. You do not know anything about me. I could be anyone. You are someone who needed help and I had help to give. That is all that matters right now. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. My husband died 4 months ago. Fever took him in just 3 days. We were heading west to start fresh in California, but after he passed, I had nothing. The wagon train left me in Santa Fe when my money ran out. I have been trying to make my way on foot ever since, working where I can, but most people do not want to hire a pregnant woman. They think I am immoral, that I must have done something wrong to end up like this. Griffin felt his heart clench at her words. I am sorry for your loss. And I am sorry for how people have treated you. That was not right. The baby comes in about 2 months, I think, Bethany continued, and he could hear the fear underlying her words. I do not know what I am going to do. I have no family, no money, nowhere to go. You have somewhere now, Griffin heard himself say. You can stay here as long as you need. Bethany looked up at him with surprise and something that might have been hope. Why would you do that? You do not know me. Griffin thought about that question. He was 32 years old, had been on his own since he was 16, and had learned to trust his instincts about people. When he looked at Bethany Henderson, he saw someone who had been dealt a hard hand but was still fighting. He saw dignity and strength, even in her exhaustion. Because it is the right thing to do, he said simply. And because I have this space, and it seems wrong to let it go to waste when someone needs it. Over the next few days, Bethany slowly regained her strength. Griffin gave her his bed and made himself a pallet in the main room. He brought her meals 3 times a day, each one more substantial than the last, and he could see the color returning to her cheeks. She was beautiful, he realized, in a quiet, understated way. When she smiled, which was rare, it lit up her whole face. She insisted on helping around the house as soon as she was able, and Griffin did not have the heart to stop her. He understood the need to feel useful, to feel like less of a burden. So she mended his clothes and cleaned and prepared meals, moving through the small house with a gentle grace despite her growing belly. Griffin found himself looking forward to coming in from his work on the ranch. For 3 years, he had come home to an empty house, eaten alone, gone to bed alone. Now there was life here, warmth beyond just the fire in the stove. Bethany would ask about his day, and he found himself telling her things he had never told anyone, about his dreams for the ranch, about the loneliness he had felt but never acknowledged. In turn, she told him about her life. She had grown up in Missouri, the youngest of 5 children. Her husband, Thomas, had been a good man, a carpenter with dreams of building a business in California. They had been married only 8 months when he died, and she had been 2 months pregnant at the time. I think Thomas would have been a wonderful father, she said one evening as they sat at the small kitchen table after supper. He was so excited when I told him about the baby. He started making a cradle right away, carved little animals into the headboard. I had to leave it behind when the wagon train abandoned me. I could not carry it. Griffin heard the grief in her voice and wished he could take it away. Your child will know their father through your stories. That is a precious gift. I hope so, Bethany said softly. I want this baby to know they were wanted, that they came from love. It was on a Saturday morning, about 2 weeks after Griffin had brought Bethany home, that the trouble started. He had needed to go into town for supplies, and Bethany had asked to come along. She was feeling stronger, she said, and wanted to see if there was any work she might be able to do to earn a little money of her own. Griffin had his doubts about that, but he understood her need for independence, so he agreed. They rode into Snowflake together in the wagon, Bethany wearing one of the dresses she had mended and cleaned, her hair pinned back neatly. The looks started the moment they arrived. Griffin could feel eyes on them as he helped Bethany down from the wagon, could see the curtains twitching in the windows of the nearby houses. Snowflake was a town of less than 200 people, and gossip traveled faster than wildfire. They went to the general store first, and Griffin noticed how the proprietor's wife, Mrs. Emily Garrett, stared at Bethany with barely concealed disapproval. When Bethany politely asked if there might be any sewing work available, Mrs. Garrett's lips thinned into a hard line. "We do not have work for your type here," she said coldly. Bethany's face flushed, but she held her head high. "I am a good seamstress, Mrs. Garrett. I would work hard." "I am sure you would," Mrs. Garrett said, her tone dripping with meaning, "but we have standards in this community." Good Christian standards. Griffin felt his temper rise. "Mrs. Garrett, I would appreciate it if you would treat Miss Henderson with the respect she deserves." "Miss Henderson, is it?" Mrs. Garrett raised an eyebrow. "Staying out at your place, is she, Griffin?" Mighty convenient for a bachelor to suddenly take in a pregnant woman. Makes a person wonder about the timing of things. Griffin opened his mouth to respond, but Bethany touched his arm gently. "Let us just go," she said quietly. But as they turned to leave, they nearly collided with Reverend Samuel Potter and his wife. The Reverend was a stern man in his 50s, with iron gray hair and a perpetual frown. He looked from Griffin to Bethany and back again. "Mr. Xavier," he said, "I was hoping to speak with you. There has been considerable talk in town about your living arrangements." "My living arrangements are my own business, Reverend," Griffin said. "Not when they affect the moral standing of our community," Reverend Potter replied. "This is a godly town, founded on principles of righteousness. We cannot have unmarried people cohabitating, especially not under such questionable circumstances." "There is nothing questionable about showing Christian charity to someone in need," Griffin shot back. "Christian charity does not require you to house an unmarried pregnant woman in your home, alone with no chaperone. It gives the appearance of impropriety, even if nothing improper is occurring." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Griffin could see the judgment on their faces, could hear the whispers starting up like a chorus of locusts. He looked at Bethany and saw the humiliation in her eyes, the way she seemed to be shrinking into herself. Something inside him snapped. He had spent his whole life being measured, being judged, trying to prove himself worthy. He had worked himself to the bone to build his ranch, to earn the respect of this community. And for what? So they could turn on him the moment he did something they did not understand. But more than his own anger, he felt a fierce protectiveness toward Bethany. She had been through so much already, had suffered losses and hardships that would have broken a lesser person. She did not deserve this. She deserved better than the small-minded cruelty of people who called themselves righteous, while turning away those in need. Griffin stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Bethany. He looked Reverend Potter in the eye, then let his gaze sweep across the gathered crowd. When he spoke, his voice was clear and firm, carrying across the street. "She's my wife now." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Bethany gasped softly behind him. The crowd went completely silent, and Griffin could see the shock on every face. "You are married," Reverend Potter said, his tone skeptical. "We are," Griffin said without hesitation. He reached back and took Bethany's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "We were married quietly, given the recent loss of her first husband." We did not think it was appropriate to have a big celebration, but we are husband and wife, legally and in the eyes of God." It was a lie, of course. They were not married at all. But as Griffin stood there, holding Bethany's trembling hand, he realized it did not feel like a lie. It felt like a truth waiting to happen. Reverend Potter still looked doubtful. "I was not aware of any marriage ceremony taking place. We were married in Santa Fe before Bethany came here," Griffin said smoothly. "By a traveling preacher. I can provide the documentation if you require it." He had no such documentation, but he was gambling that the Reverend would not actually demand to see it. To do so would be to suggest that Griffin was lying, which would be a serious accusation and one that could backfire badly. Reverend Potter's jaw worked for a moment. "I see. Well, that does change things. You should have said something sooner, Xavier. It would have saved everyone considerable confusion." "We value our privacy," Griffin said. "But I can see now that was a mistake. So let me be clear. Bethany is my wife. That child she carries will be raised as my own. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." There was steel in his voice, and the crowd began to disperse, muttering among themselves. Mrs. Garrett disappeared back into the store with a sniff. Reverend Potter gave a curt nod and walked away, his wife trailing behind him. When they were alone, or as alone as they could be on a public street, Bethany turned to Griffin with wide eyes. "Why did you say that? We are not married." "We can be," Griffin said. The words came out before he could think about them, but once they were said, he did not want to take them back. "I mean it, Bethany. Marry me. For real. You cannot be serious," she whispered. "You barely know me. I am carrying another man's child. You do not have to sacrifice yourself like this." "It is not a sacrifice," Griffin said, and he was surprised to realize how true that was. "Bethany, these past 2 weeks have been the best 2 weeks I have had in years. Coming home to you, talking with you, sharing meals with you. It has made me realize how lonely I have been. I know this is sudden, and I know I am not offering you some grand romance. But I am offering you safety and respect and a home for you and your child. I am offering you partnership, and maybe in time we could build something real together." Tears were streaming down Bethany's face now. "Griffin, I do not know what to say. Say yes," he urged gently. "Or say you need time to think about it. Just do not say no because you think you are not worthy. You are worthy of everything good in this world, Bethany Henderson." She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Griffin felt something warm unfold in his chest. He squeezed her hand gently. "Then let us go find Reverend Potter and make this official." They were married that very afternoon in the small church at the center of Snowflake. Reverend Potter seemed relieved to be regularizing the situation, though he still maintained a somewhat disapproving air. There were no guests, no flowers, no celebration. Bethany wore the same simple dress she had been wearing all day, and Griffin wore his work clothes, his hat in his hands. But when he said his vows, looking into Bethany's blue eyes, he meant every word. For better or worse, in sickness and health, until death parted them. He would honor and cherish her. He would be a husband to her and a father to her child. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Griffin leaned down and kissed her gently on the forehead. It was chaste and sweet, and he felt her lean into him just slightly, accepting his affection. They rode back to the ranch as husband and wife, and Griffin found himself feeling nervous in a way he had not felt in years. Everything was different now, and yet everything was the same. Bethany was still Bethany, and he was still Griffin. But now they had made promises to each other, binding themselves together in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. That night, after a quiet supper, They stood awkwardly in the main room of the house. Griffin cleared his throat. "I will continue to sleep out here." "You should have the bed, especially in your condition. I do not expect anything from you, Bethany. This marriage can be whatever you need it to be." Bethany looked at him with something soft in her eyes. "You are a good man, Griffin Xavier. I do not think you realize how rare that is." Over the following weeks, they settled into a new rhythm as husband and wife. Griffin continued his work on the ranch, tending to his cattle and horses, mending fences and preparing for the coming winter. Bethany kept the house, and under her care, it became a true home. She planted herbs in a small garden by the kitchen door. She made curtains for the windows from fabric Griffin bought for her in town. She filled the house with small touches that spoke of comfort and care. And slowly, carefully, they began to know each other in deeper ways. They talked in the evenings after supper, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Griffin told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 14, about the hard years that followed. Bethany told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her love of reading, about the life she had imagined with Thomas before it was so cruelly cut short. They did not speak much about the future, not yet. That felt too uncertain, too fragile. But they spoke about the present, about the small joys they found in each day. The way the morning light came through the kitchen window, the taste of Bethany's apple pie, the quiet companionship of working side by side. Griffin found himself falling in love with her, though he did not say it. He loved the way she hummed while she worked, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the way she rested her hands on her belly when she felt the baby kick. He loved her kindness, her strength, her resilience. And he began to hope, though he barely dared to, that maybe she was developing feelings for him too. He saw it in the way she smiled when he came in from working, in the way she had started touching his arm or shoulder in passing, in the way she looked at him sometimes when she thought he was not paying attention. In town, the whispers had changed but not stopped. People now knew that Griffin and Bethany were married, but there was still speculation about the timing, about the baby, about whether Griffin was really the father. Some people were kind, like Doc Morrison's wife, who brought over a basket of baby clothes and offered to help when the time came. But others remained cold and distant. Griffin did not care. Let them whisper. He had everything he needed right here on his ranch. As September turned into October, Bethany grew larger and moved more slowly. Griffin worried about her constantly, making sure she did not overwork herself, insisting she rest in the afternoons. Doc Morrison came out to check on her and pronounced both mother and baby healthy. "Should be any time in the next few weeks," he told Griffin. "Make sure you come fetch me when her time comes. And do not panic. First babies can take a while." Griffin nodded, trying to tamp down the anxiety that had been building in him. He had helped with the birth of calves and foals, but a human baby was something else entirely. What if something went wrong? What if he lost her? He could not bear to think about it. One evening in late October, they were sitting together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air had grown cooler, autumn settling into the high country. Bethany was wrapped in a shawl Griffin had bought for her, and she was knitting a small blanket for the baby. "Griffin," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." He looked over at her, concerned by the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" She set down her knitting and turned to face him. "When you said those words in town, when you told everyone I was your wife, you saved me. Not just from gossip or judgment, but from a life of struggle and fear. You gave me hope when I had none left. And then you married me for real, and you have been nothing but kind and patient and good. I just want you to know that I am grateful, truly grateful for everything you have done. You do not need to thank me, Griffin started, but she held up a hand. I am not finished, she said. What I am trying to say rather badly is that this has become more than gratitude. You have become more than just my rescuer or my husband in name only. Griffin, I have feelings for you, real feelings. I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know. Griffin felt his heart stop and then start again, beating hard against his ribs. Bethany, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I have been in love with you for weeks. I did not say anything because I did not want to pressure you, did not want you to feel obligated. But I love you. I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you have made this house a home. I love everything about you. Tears were shining in Bethany's eyes, but they were happy tears. I was so afraid you only married me out of duty. I married you because I could not imagine my life without you, Griffin said. He reached out and cupped her face gently with his hand. Bethany, you and this baby, you are my family now. You are my whole world. She leaned into his touch and then she kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, but then it deepened into something more, something that spoke of longing and love and promises of the future. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. I love you, Bethany whispered. I love you too, Griffin replied. That night, for the first time, Griffin did not sleep on his pallet in the main room. Bethany invited him into their bedroom, into their bed, and they held each other through the night, two souls finding comfort and love in each other's arms. The baby came 3 weeks later, on a cold November night. Bethany's labor started just after supper, and Griffin rode like the devil himself to fetch Doc Morrison. The doctor arrived within the hour and took over with calm efficiency, while Griffin paced outside the bedroom door, feeling utterly useless. He could hear Bethany's cries of pain, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. He wanted to be in there with her, wanted to hold her hand and tell her she was strong enough to do this. But Doc Morrison had shooed him out, saying he would only be in the way. Hours passed. The night grew deeper and Griffin's anxiety grew with it. What if something was wrong? What if the doctor needed more help than he had here? What if Bethany was in real danger? And then, finally, he heard it. The thin, wavering cry of a newborn baby. Griffin's knees nearly buckled with relief. He waited, every muscle tense, until finally the bedroom door opened and Doc Morrison emerged, looking tired but pleased. You have a son, he said. And your wife is a warrior, Xavier. She did beautifully. Can I see her? Griffin asked. Give us just a few more minutes to get her settled. Then you can come in. Those few minutes felt like years, but finally Doc Morrison beckoned him inside. Bethany was propped up in bed, looking exhausted and radiant all at once. And in her arms, wrapped in the blanket she had been knitting, was a tiny baby with a shock of dark hair. Griffin approached slowly, hardly daring to breathe. Bethany smiled at him, tired but happy. Come meet your son, she said softly. Griffin sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. He was so small, so perfect. His tiny fingers curled and uncurled and his eyes squinted against the lamplight. Griffin felt something crack open inside him, a love so fierce and immediate that it almost hurt. He is beautiful, Griffin whispered. You are both beautiful. He needs a name, Bethany said. I was thinking, if you agree, we could name him Thomas Griffin Xavier. Thomas for his birth father, Griffin for the man who will raise him as his own. Griffin felt tears sting his eyes. That is perfect, he managed. Can I hold him? Bethany carefully transferred the baby into Griffin's arms, and he held his son, this child who was not his by blood but was his in every way that mattered. Thomas made a small sound, and Griffin felt his heart expand to hold this new love. Hello, Thomas, he murmured. I am your father, and I promise you I will love you and protect you for all of my days. The weeks that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Thomas was a good baby, but he still needed feeding every few hours, which meant neither Griffin nor Bethany got much sleep. They took turns walking him when he fussed, and Griffin discovered he had a talent for soothing the baby with his deep voice, singing old cowboy songs his own father had taught him. Bethany recovered well from the birth, and Griffin marveled at her strength. She was up and moving within days, though he tried to get her to rest as much as possible. They fell into a new rhythm, the three of them, learning to be a family. In December, the first snow fell. Griffin made sure they had plenty of wood stocked for the fireplace, and that the house was sealed tight against the cold. Bethany had been sewing a new quilt, and they would all huddle together under it in the evenings, Thomas sleeping between them, warm and safe. It was during one of these evenings that Griffin brought up something that had been on his mind. "Bethany, I have been thinking. This house is getting small with the three of us, and if we are blessed with more children in the future, we will need more space. I want to add on a couple of rooms come spring. A proper nursery for Thomas and maybe another bedroom. What do you think?" Bethany looked at him with surprise and pleasure. "You want more children? If you do," Griffin said. "I know Thomas is not even 2 months old yet, and I am not trying to rush anything. But yes, I would love to have more children with you. I want a big family, Bethany. I want this house to be filled with life and love." "I want that too," Bethany said softly. She leaned over and kissed him. "I want to build a life with you, Griffin. A real life, with all the joy and chaos that comes with it." "Then that is what we will do," Griffin promised. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly, just the three of them. Griffin had carved a small wooden horse for Thomas, even though the baby was far too young to appreciate it. Bethany had made Griffin a new shirt, and he had bought her a beautiful silver locket in which he had placed a small photograph of the three of them that the traveling photographer had taken when he passed through Snowflake in early December. "So you can keep us close to your heart," Griffin said as he fastened it around her neck. "You are always in my heart," Bethany replied, touching the locket gently. Winter slowly gave way to spring, and as the snow melted and the land turned green again, Griffin began work on the addition to the house. Several of his neighbors came to help, including a man named Henry Wells who had a ranch nearby. Henry had always been friendly, and he seemed genuinely happy for Griffin and Bethany. "You have got yourself a good woman there, Xavier," Henry said as they worked on framing the new rooms. "And that boy of yours is as fine a child as I have seen. You are a lucky man." "I know it," Griffin agreed. "Every single day, I know it." The new rooms were finished by May, and Bethany delighted in setting up the nursery for Thomas. She made new curtains and painted a border of flowers around the top of the walls. Thomas had a proper crib now, one that Griffin had built with his own hands, and the room was bright and cheerful. With the extra space, the house felt more like a home than ever. Bethany started talking about getting a few chickens so they could have fresh eggs, and Griffin agreed readily. They went together to the Garrett's farm, where Mrs. Garrett's disapproval had thawed somewhat, especially after she saw how devoted Griffin was to Bethany and Thomas. She sold them 6 laying hens and a rooster, and Bethany was thrilled. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. Griffin worked his ranch, which was slowly growing and becoming more profitable. Bethany tended the house and the baby and her growing garden. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk about their day, about their dreams for the future. In June, they attended the town's summer social, the first real public event they had gone to as a family. Griffin was nervous about it, worried that people would still whisper and judge. But Bethany insisted they go, and she was right. Most people were kind, coming over to admire Thomas and congratulate them on their marriage. There were still a few who were cold, including Reverend Potter, who maintained his stiff disapproval. But Griffin did not care. He had Bethany and Thomas, and that was all that mattered. At the social, Thomas attracted a lot of attention. He was 6 months old now, chubby and happy, with his mother's blue eyes and a smile that could charm anyone. Women cooed over him, and even some of the stern-faced ranchers softened when the baby grabbed their fingers. "You have done well for yourself, Xavier," one of the older ranchers, Bill Carson, said to Griffin. "That is a fine family you have got." "Thank you, sir," Griffin replied. "I am a fortunate man." As summer turned to fall and fall to winter again, the Xavier family continued to grow closer. Thomas celebrated his first birthday in November, and Bethany made him a cake that he promptly smashed into his face, making everyone laugh. Griffin took a photograph of the moment, wanting to capture the joy. It was in early 1883, when Thomas was just over a year old, that Bethany told Griffin she was pregnant again. They were lying in bed together, Thomas asleep in his nursery, when she took his hand and placed it on her still, flat belly. "There is another little one growing in there," she said softly. "Our baby this time, a brother or sister for Thomas." Griffin felt tears prick his eyes. "Truly, truly," Bethany confirmed. "I saw Doc Morrison yesterday to be sure. He says the baby should come around August." Griffin pulled her close, holding her tight. "I love you so much, Bethany. You have given me everything I ever wanted but was afraid to hope for." "You gave me everything too," Bethany said. "You gave me a home and safety and love. You gave Thomas a father. And now you are giving me another child to love. I could not be happier, Griffin." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and this time Griffin was much calmer about the whole process. He had been through it once already, and while he still worried, he trusted that Bethany was strong and that Doc Morrison would take good care of her. Thomas was toddling around now, getting into everything, and Bethany would laugh as she chased after him. Griffin loved watching them together, loved seeing the bond between mother and son, and he loved knowing that soon there would be another child to add to their family. In June of that year, Griffin received word that a herd of cattle was available for purchase at a good price from a ranch in Texas that was going out of business. It would mean a significant expansion of his operation, but it would also mean he would have to travel to Texas to collect the cattle and drive them back. The trip would take at least a month, maybe longer. Griffin was torn. He did not want to leave Bethany, especially not while she was pregnant. But the opportunity was too good to pass up. It could mean real financial security for their family. When he told Bethany about it, she immediately saw his dilemma. "You should go," she said. "This is important for the ranch, for our future. But what if the baby comes early? What if you need me?" Griffin worried. "The baby is not due until August, and it is only June. You will be back in plenty of time. And even if you are not, Doc Morrison and the neighbor women will help me. We will be fine, Griffin. You have to think about our long-term security." "Are you certain?" Griffin asked. "I am certain," Bethany said firmly. "Go to Texas. Buy the cattle. Build our future. Thomas and I will be here waiting when you get back." So Griffin went, though he hated every moment of being away from his family. He rode south with 2 hired hands, purchased the cattle, and began the long drive back north. The work was hard and hot, and every night he thought about Bethany and Thomas, wondering what they were doing, hoping they were safe. He pushed the drive as hard as he dared, wanting to get home as quickly as possible. They made good time, arriving back at the ranch in early August, dusty and tired but successful. Griffin had doubled his herd, and the financial implications were significant. They would be comfortable now, truly comfortable, with money to save and invest in further improvements. But all of that mattered less than getting to the house and seeing Bethany and Thomas. He left the hired hands to manage the cattle and rode hard for the house, his heart pounding with anticipation. He found Bethany in the kitchen, heavily pregnant but glowing with health. Thomas was playing on the floor with the wooden blocks Griffin had made for him, and when he saw his father, he squealed with delight and toddled over, arms outstretched. Griffin scooped him up, holding him tight, and then he went to Bethany and wrapped his free arm around her, pulling her close despite her belly between them. "I missed you," he said into her hair. "So much." "We missed you too," Bethany replied. "But you are home now, that is all that matters." 2 weeks later, their second child was born. The labor was shorter this time, and Griffin was allowed to stay in the room with Bethany, holding her hand and encouraging her through each contraction. When the baby finally emerged, crying lustily, Doc Morrison announced, "It is a girl." Griffin looked down at his daughter, tiny and perfect, and felt his heart expand yet again. She had Bethany's dark hair and his own nose, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "What should we name her?" he asked Bethany. Bethany smiled. "I was thinking Grace." "Grace Elizabeth Xavier." "Grace," Griffin repeated, testing the name. "It is perfect. She is perfect." Thomas was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to touch her constantly. Griffin and Bethany had to keep a close eye on him to make sure he was gentle, but the toddler clearly adored the baby. He would bring her his toys, patting her head softly and saying "baby" in his sweet, high voice. Life with 2 children was busy and chaotic, but Griffin had never been happier. He would come in from working to find Bethany nursing Grace while Thomas played nearby, and the scene filled him with such contentment that he sometimes had to stop and just take it in. The ranch continued to prosper. With the expanded herd, Griffin was able to hire on some regular help, which meant he did not have to work quite as many hours and could spend more time with his family. Bethany's garden flourished, and she started selling her excess produce at the town market, earning her own money that she carefully saved. "For the children's education," she told Griffin. "I want them to have opportunities, to be able to read and write and maybe even go to a real school someday." Griffin agreed wholeheartedly. He had missed out on much formal education himself, and he wanted better for his children. When Grace was 6 months old and Thomas was 2.5, Griffin and Bethany decided to host a small gathering at their ranch. They invited several of their neighbors, including Henry Wells and his wife, and Doc Morrison and his family. It was the first time they had entertained, and Bethany worked for days preparing food and getting the house ready. The gathering was a success. People ate and talked and laughed, and the children played together in the yard. Griffin stood on the porch, watching Bethany move among their guests, gracious and warm, and he felt a profound sense of gratitude. This was the life they had built together, from nothing but hope and determination. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Griffin and Bethany sat together on the porch in the quiet darkness. "That was wonderful," Bethany said, leaning her head on Griffin's shoulder. "I love having people here, sharing our home." "We should do it more often," Griffin agreed. "This house was made for a family, for life and laughter." "Griffin," Bethany said softly, "do you ever regret it, taking me in that day? Your life would have been simpler without me and all the complications I brought." Griffin turned to look at her, surprised. "Bethany, how can you even ask that? You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Thomas and Grace, you are my whole world. I have never regretted a single moment." "I just want you to know that I see everything you have done for us," Bethany said. "I see how hard you work, how much you sacrifice, and I love you more every day for it." "Loving you is not a sacrifice," Griffin said. "It is the easiest thing I have ever done." They kissed then, sweet and slow, and Griffin felt the truth of his words settle into his bones. This was where he was meant to be. This was home. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, wanting to help with the ranch work. Grace was a sweet, gentle child who loved animals and flowers and had her mother's kind heart. In 1885, when Thomas was 4 and Grace was 2, Bethany became pregnant again. This time, she carried twins, though they did not know it until the babies were born in early 1886. 2 boys, identical in every way with their father's dark hair and their mother's blue eyes. Griffin named them James and Joshua, and he could not tell them apart for the first several months of their lives. Bethany could always tell, though, claiming that James was slightly more serious while Joshua was the one always smiling. With 4 children, the house was bursting at the seams. Griffin added on yet again, building 2 more bedrooms and expanding the main room. The ranch was doing well enough that they could afford it, and he wanted his children to have space to grow. Thomas started attending the small school in Snowflake when he turned 6, and he took to learning like a duck to water. He would come home each day full of stories about what he had learned, and he taught Grace his letters in the evenings, the 2 of them huddled together over a slate. Griffin and Bethany watched their children grow with pride and love. They attended church services in town most Sundays, and while Reverend Potter never quite warmed to them completely, most of the community had fully accepted them. The whispers had long since stopped, replaced by respect for the family Griffin and Bethany had built. In the spring of 1888, tragedy struck the community. A fire swept through Snowflake, destroying several buildings including the general store and the church. No one was killed, thank God, but many families lost everything. Griffin and Bethany immediately opened their home and their resources to help. They took in the Garrett family, whose home had been destroyed, housing them for 2 months while their new house was built. Bethany organized the women to sew clothes and make bedding for those who had lost everything. Griffin and the other ranchers donated money and materials to rebuild the church. It was during this time that Griffin saw how much the community had changed their view of his family. People thanked Bethany for her kindness and praised Griffin for his generosity. The Garretts, who had been among the coldest toward them in the early days, became close friends. "I was wrong about you," Mrs. Garrett told Bethany one evening as they sat sewing together. "I judged you harshly when you first came to town, and I am sorry for that. You have proven yourself to be one of the finest women I know." "Thank you," Bethany said graciously. "I understand why people were suspicious. I was a stranger and under unusual circumstances. But I am grateful that we were able to move past that." By the time the Garretts moved into their new home, the 2 families had become genuinely close. Their children played together, and the adults helped each other whenever needed. Life continued its steady, satisfying rhythm. Thomas grew tall and strong, already showing signs of the man he would become. Grace was a beauty, with her mother's grace and kindness. The twins were wild and energetic, always getting into mischief but impossible to stay angry at. In 1890, Bethany gave birth one more time, to a daughter they named Hope. She was their last child, born when Bethany was 33 and Griffin was 41. She was small and delicate, with red gold hair that came from some distant ancestor, and she quickly became the darling of the entire family. With 5 children, the Xavier Ranch was always full of noise and activity. Griffin loved every chaotic moment of it. He loved the sound of his children's laughter, the way they all gathered around the dinner table each evening, the family prayers before bed. He loved watching Bethany with their children, seeing the love in her eyes, and knowing that they had built this together. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep and he and Bethany were alone, they would sometimes talk about that day in Snowflake when their lives had changed forever. "You remember when you told everyone I was your wife?" Bethany would ask, a smile playing at her lips. "How could I forget?" Griffin would reply, "It was the moment everything became real for me, the moment I knew I could not let you go. I was so shocked," Bethany would say, "and so scared, but also so hopeful." "I am glad you said yes when I actually asked you to marry me," Griffin would tell her. "I am glad you gave us a chance." "You gave me a chance first," Bethany would remind him. "You saw me when I was at my lowest and you did not turn away. You offered me hope when I had none. Everything good in my life started that day, Griffin." As the children grew older, they learned the truth about Thomas's parentage. Griffin and Bethany had always planned to tell them when they were old enough to understand, and they did so when Thomas was 12. They explained about Bethany's first husband, about how she had come to Snowflake alone and pregnant, about how Griffin had helped her and then married her. Thomas was quiet for a long time after hearing the story. Then he looked at Griffin and said, "You are still my father. You will always be my father." Griffin felt tears burn in his eyes. "And you will always be my son. Always." The other children took the news in stride. To them it changed nothing. They were a family, bound by love rather than just blood, and that love was unshakable. Thomas grew into a fine young man, serious and hardworking like his father. He had Griffin's steady nature and Bethany's kind heart, and everyone who knew him respected him. When he turned 18 in 1899, he announced that he wanted to stay on the ranch and work alongside Griffin, eventually taking over the operation. Griffin could not have been more proud. He had built this ranch from nothing, and now his son would carry it forward into the new century. Grace, at 16, was being courted by the son of a neighboring rancher, a good young man named Daniel Foster. Griffin approved of him, especially after seeing how respectfully he treated Grace and how he asked permission before courting her seriously. The twins, at 13, were attending school in Snowflake and showing promise. James wanted to be a doctor, inspired by Doc Morrison, while Joshua dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Griffin and Bethany encouraged both dreams, setting aside money for their education. And Hope, at 9, was still their baby, though she hated being called that. She was bright and curious, always asking questions and reading everything she could get her hands on. In the summer of 1900, as the old century gave way to the new, Griffin and Bethany celebrated their 19th anniversary. They had been married in truth for 19 years, though they always counted from that November day in 1881 when they spoke their vows before Reverend Potter. Griffin planned a special surprise for Bethany. He arranged for the children to stay with the Wells family for the night, and he took Bethany on a picnic to a beautiful spot by the creek on their property. He had packed her favorite foods and brought a bottle of wine he had been saving. They sat together on a blanket, watching the sun set over the mountains, and Griffin took Bethany's hand. 19 years ago, I made you a promise," he said. "I promised to honor and cherish you for all my days, and I want you to know that I have meant it every single day since. You have been my partner, my love, my best friend. You have given me a family and a home and a life beyond anything I ever dreamed possible. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Bethany was crying, happy tears streaming down her face. "Griffin, you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me hope and safety and love. You became a father to Thomas without hesitation. You have been the best husband, the best father, the best man I have ever known. I love you with everything I am." They kissed as the sun set, and Griffin felt the same flutter of excitement he had felt on their wedding night 19 years ago. Bethany was older now. They both were, with lines on their faces and gray in their hair. But she was still the most beautiful woman in the world to him, and he knew he was the luckiest man alive. The years continued to unfold. Grace married Daniel Foster in 1902 in a beautiful ceremony at the rebuilt church in Snowflake. The whole town attended, and Griffin walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes. She looked so much like her mother, and he was both proud and heartbroken to be giving her away. But Daniel was a good man, and he made Grace happy, which was all Griffin could ask for. They settled on Daniel's family ranch, just a few miles away, so Griffin and Bethany still saw them often. Thomas married in 1904 to a sweet young woman named Margaret Johnson, who had come to Snowflake to teach at the school. They had a small wedding and settled into a house Griffin had built for them on the Xavier Ranch. Thomas officially took over most of the day-to-day operations, though Griffin still helped out. The twins both left for college, James to study medicine in Phoenix and Joshua to study law in Albuquerque. Griffin and Bethany were incredibly proud, though they missed having them home. Hope grew into a beautiful, intelligent young woman. She was the last child still at home, and Griffin and Bethany cherished their time with her, knowing that soon she too would be grown and gone. In 1906, Grace gave birth to Griffin and Bethany's first grandchild, a boy they named Griffin Daniel Foster. Griffin held his grandson for the first time and felt the circle of life complete itself. From that day years ago when he had held Thomas for the first time, claiming him as his son, to now, holding his grandson, everything had led to this moment. Thomas and Margaret had their first child the following year, a daughter named Bethany Grace Xavier. And so the family continued to grow and expand, roots running deep in the Arizona soil. Griffin was 58 years old in 1907, and he found himself reflecting more and more on the life he had lived. He thought about that day in 1881, when he had seen a pregnant stranger collapse on the street in Snowflake. He thought about the decision he had made in that moment to help her, not knowing where it would lead. That single decision had changed everything. It had given him a wife, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. It had taught him that love came in many forms, that family was about more than blood, that the greatest rewards often came from the greatest risks. One evening, he and Bethany were sitting on their porch, watching the sunset. It was their favorite time of day, a moment of peace and quiet after the bustle of family life. Hope was inside practicing her piano, and the sound drifted out through the open windows. "You ever think about how different our lives could have been?" Bethany asked. "If you had not stopped to help me that day, all the time," Griffin admitted. "And I thank God every day that I did stop. You were the missing piece I did not know I was looking for, Bethany." "You were my miracle," Bethany said. "You appeared when I had lost all hope and you gave me everything. Sometimes I still cannot believe how blessed I am." Griffin squeezed her hand. "We are both blessed. We found each other when we needed each other most, and we built something beautiful together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Bethany spoke again. "Griffin, I want you to know something. When I married you, I thought I was making a practical choice. I cared for you, but I was not sure I could ever love again after losing Thomas. But I was wrong. You taught me that the heart has infinite capacity for love. What we have together is different from what I had before, but it is no less real and no less deep. You are the love of my life, Griffin Xavier." Griffin felt emotion well up in his chest. "And you are mine, Bethany. You always will be." As the years moved into the 1910s, Griffin and Bethany settled into the role of beloved grandparents. They had 8 grandchildren by 1912, and they spoiled every one of them. The Xavier Ranch had become a gathering place for the entire extended family, with Sunday dinners that often included 20 or more people. Griffin watched his children and grandchildren with deep satisfaction. Thomas was running the ranch with skill and wisdom, expanding it even further than Griffin had. Grace was a wonderful mother, raising her children with the same gentleness her own mother had shown. The twins had both finished their education and were making names for themselves. James as a respected doctor in Phoenix and Joshua as a lawyer working for the territorial government. Hope had gone to normal school and become a teacher like her sister-in-law Margaret, and she was making a difference in the lives of children in Snowflake. All of them had turned out well, and Griffin knew that was largely due to Bethany. She had been the heart of their family, the one who had filled their home with love and laughter and wisdom. She had taught their children kindness and compassion, integrity and hard work. She had been everything a mother should be, and Griffin loved her more than words could express. In the spring of 1918, the Spanish flu swept through Arizona. It was a terrifying time, with people dying by the thousands. The Xavier family was largely spared, though several of them caught mild cases. Griffin and Bethany, now in their 60s, worried constantly about their children and grandchildren. Doc Morrison, now quite elderly himself but still practicing, worked tirelessly to help the sick. Griffin and Bethany supported his efforts however they could, and they prayed every day for the safety of their loved ones. When the pandemic finally passed, the family gathered at the ranch for a day of Thanksgiving. They had all survived, and they had much to be grateful for. As Griffin looked around at his family, 3 generations gathered together, he felt a profound sense of peace. He had lived a good life. He had loved well and been loved in return. He had built something lasting, something that would continue long after he was gone. And it had all started with one act of kindness on a dusty street in Snowflake. In 1920, Griffin and Bethany celebrated their 39th anniversary. They were both 71 years old, and they had been blessed with long life and good health. They still lived on the ranch, though Thomas and Margaret had taken over the main house, and Griffin and Bethany had moved into a comfortable smaller house that Thomas had built for them nearby. On their anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration. There were children and grandchildren everywhere, and even a few great-grandchildren, as Thomas and Margaret's oldest children had married and started families of their own. Griffin stood to make a toast, and the room fell quiet. 39 years ago, I married the love of my life. It was not a conventional beginning. Some of you know the story, but for those who do not, Bethany came to Snowflake alone and pregnant, and I helped her. The town whispered and judged, and so I told them she was my wife. And then I asked her to actually marry me, and miraculously, she said yes. Everyone laughed, and Bethany smiled, her eyes shining. Griffin continued, "What I want you all to know is that the love we built together, the family we created, started from a place of compassion and kindness. We were not perfect. We made mistakes. But we chose to love each other every single day, and that choice made all the difference. I hope that each of you will remember that love is a choice, and it is the most important choice you will ever make. Choose love, choose family, choose forgiveness and grace. That is how you build a life worth living." There was not a dry eye in the room, and Thomas raised his glass. "To Mom and Dad, thank you for showing us what real love looks like. Thank you for building a family rooted in kindness and respect. We love you both." "To Mom and Dad," everyone echoed, and Griffin and Bethany beamed with joy. Griffin Xavier lived to be 83 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep in the summer of 1932. Bethany was beside him when he went, holding his hand just as she had held it on their wedding day. He died surrounded by love, in the house he had built with his own hands, on the land he had worked his whole life. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people. The Xavier family had become one of the most respected families in Snowflake, and Griffin had been beloved by all who knew him. People spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his generosity. They spoke of the love he had shown his wife and children, the example he had set for the entire community. Bethany lived another 3 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She spoke often of Griffin in those years, remembering their life together with fondness and joy. She never stopped missing him, but she was grateful for every moment they had shared. When Bethany Henderson Xavier passed away in 1935, at the age of 76, she was laid to rest beside Griffin in the Snowflake Cemetery. Their headstone read simply, "Griffin and Bethany Xavier, beloved parents and grandparents, together forever." But their real legacy was not written in stone. It lived on in the thriving ranch that Thomas and his children continued to run. It lived on in the kindness and compassion that their children and grandchildren showed to others. It lived on in the love story that became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and holidays. The story of how Griffin Xavier had taken in a pregnant stranger on a hot August day in 1881, how the whole town had whispered and judged, and how he had stood up and declared, "She's my wife now." The story of how that declaration had become truth, how a practical arrangement had blossomed into deep and abiding love, how 2 broken people had found wholeness in each other. It was a story of compassion triumphing over judgment, of love growing in unexpected places, of family being defined not by blood but by choice and commitment. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as challenges, and that opening your heart to help another person can change both of your lives forever. And in the warm Arizona evenings, when the Xavier family gathered together, they would tell the story again, making sure each new generation knew where they came from, knew the love that had founded their family, knew that they carried Griffin and Bethany's legacy forward into the future. The ranch still stood, expanded and modernized, but still recognizably the same place Griffin had built all those years ago. The house he had added onto so many times still sheltered his descendants. And the love he and Bethany had shared still echoed through the generations, a testament to the power of choosing kindness, choosing love, choosing to see the best in others, and giving them a chance to flourish. Griffin and Bethany's story was one of hope and redemption, of second chances and new beginnings. It showed that it was never too late to find love, never too late to build a family, never too late to create a life of meaning and purpose. All it took was courage, compassion, and the willingness to stand up and say, "This matters. This person matters. I choose love." And in choosing love, Griffin and Bethany had built an empire of the heart that would last forever, touching lives for generations to come, reminding everyone who heard their story that love, real and true and lasting love, was always worth fighting for.